This is the first video in a brand new mini-series that I hope is going to be 5 videos long, and that will be somewhat of a primer or a lightweight guide for readers who are interested in stepping into the science fiction fantasy genres. And I've got at least 5 videos planned, so it's going to be this one. It is going to be science fiction books for beginners. It's going to be different types or subgenres of fantasy, different types or subgenres of science fiction, and then we're going to conclude with something like 10 tips for getting into the science fiction fantasy genres. This video is going to cover the best fantasy books for beginners. If you are looking to get into fantasy books, you are interested in magic and in new worlds and in creatures and creations that are not normal to our world today, then the first book that I might suggest to you is called The Final Empire. A lot of people know it as Mistborn, as it is the start of the Mistborn series and saga. It is by Brandon Sanderson, and it is very obviously one of my favorite books of all time. It's got an intricate magic system, but at the same time, it is easily accessible. Not the magic system, but the writing style is very common. Brandon Sanderson doesn't use, the most robust language, and the way that he communicates feelings, emotions, scenes, set pieces, fighting sequences, all of those things are very accessible, very palatable for any kind of audience. And then on top of that, he gives us such a compelling world and story within that world. Really, it is a fantasy heist. So if you like movies like Ocean's 11 or other like big heist movies, and it's kind of just set in a fantasy world with some very intriguing and interesting characters and a really, really cool young female lead that is kind of just exploring this magic system for the first time, then The Final Empire might be for you. Next up is a book that took me by surprise earlier this year. It is a debut novel by Josiah Bancroft called Senlin Ascends. This is an extremely quirky fantasy. So there is no robust magic system. Really, it's kind of a little bit steampunk in the sense that it is less on the magic side of things and more on just the fantastical, like robotic, it's all centered around this tower, this ancient construct called the Tower of Babel. By the way, Senlin Ascends is the start of the Babel series that is almost complete. I think will be complete at the end of this year with 4 books, I believe. And this tells the tale of Thomas Senlin on his honeymoon with his new wife to this ancient construct known as the Tower of Babel. Him and his wife get separated at the very beginning, and then really the rest of the series is him trying to be reunited with his wife. This has such beautifully illustrated characters, such a creative, realized world in the sense of the Tower of Babel and all of its different levels or ringdoms. It's very fantastical. It's very quirky. It's very silly and humorous, but also tells a compelling story of love and friendship and all of these incredibly unique characters that show up one time and then will show up again much later, either to the benefit of our main character or to the reverse of the benefit, to his detriment. It is a incredibly, I'll say it one last time, quirky fantasy series and book, and it's extremely palatable for a new audience. And then we've got An Ember in the Ashes by Saba Tahir. This is stepping a little bit more into the magical world, but really it's magic light, at least in this first book in this Ember series. It's not a robust magic system, and really she's not as intricate of a magic system as say Sanderson is, but there's still some magic in the world here, and you've got different POVs. You've got Laia, who is our kind of main character, who's a slave girl, and then you've got Elias, who is this military guy that is going through military training for the Empire, and he's about to graduate, and their relation, how they connect, their stories, and how they're separate, but then they intertwine near the end of the book. It's really a creative world that Saba just begins here, and as the series continues, the magic is more realized and more robust, and you see the different layers that she already laid out here in this first novel. But it's got some compelling characters, and if you like romance, you start to get some good romance written here. It's not the cheesy kind of romance that you find in some other literature. Here you've got romance mixed with real good drama, mixed with light magic in a fully realized empire and world, and it's done exceptionally well. Let's go a step further. We're going more magical than ever before with The Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter. This completely rocked me the first time that I read it, and it's another debut novel, which is just ridiculous, and it is a tale that is told in a way that is maybe atypical from a lot of fantasy books. As you get into the fantasy genre, you'll see that for decades and decades, the majority of fantasy has been kind of set on this European magical realism type thing. It's like it's set in this castles and moats and all of those things are very European. Well, thankfully, there are a lot of fantasy books that are now being written from about different cultures as its base. This is one of them. The Rage of Dragons is this African-inspired epic fantasy that is the beginning, again, of another series that is yet to be complete, where you are following a main character that is on a course of vengeance and revenge, and he makes a lot of terrible decisions, which puts a lot of people off from this story, but it makes it so intriguing. It's got probably the most unique magic system that I've come across in a long time, and while it's not, again, as intricate as Brandon Sanderson's, maybe in the Mistborn series, it is unique in its own, and it's very fantasy heavy. I mean, here, The Rage of Dragons, the two things that you get most prominently featured here in the story is both rage and dragons. Who doesn't love dragons, and who doesn't love a good revenge story? You put the two together and you've got this epic fantasy novel. Next up, we've got The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. To be honest, I debated including this on my list. A lot of people have mixed feelings and emotions about this book. Some really like it, some really don't. You don't have many in the middle. And then for a lot, they wouldn't encourage it as maybe one of your first fantasy novels. I'm going to include it because I do think it is unique. It's very reminiscent in the way that Patrick Rothfuss tells his story of older fantasy, even like Lord of the Rings and some of those older fantasies, because he doesn't always get straight to the point, but his prose is very poetic and flowery in a very good way. He's very decisive about every word and phrase that he uses to tell this story. And the story, by the way, is very, very great. We've got this flash back and forward, kind of in the future is your main setting, as Kvoth, the main character, is telling his story of his childhood and of his past. One of the cool things about this is that it's not centered on some kind of knight in shining armor. It's not centered on some kind of assassin, although those are great stories. This is centered on a bard, on someone who doesn't really fight with fist and power, but fights with playing of instruments and his voice. It's a very unique story that meanders, but very intentionally, that drifts, but very intentionally. It's just a beautiful piece of literature. The series is not yet complete, and there's a lot of conversation to be had there, but the first two books in the series are out. This is the very first one, The Name of the Wind, and it's beautiful. Next up is Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas, and we're moving kind of from adult fantasy to a little bit more young adult fantasy. Our protagonist is a young 18-year-old girl who is an assassin, or she's becoming one. So we've got a really cool cast of characters here. Really, the protagonist is our main focus here, and I just think it's so much fun to have a young female assassin. It's very reminiscent of the lead character in The Final Empire, the first book that I mentioned here. But this story is very cool. The series is very lengthy and continues, and a lot of people love to follow along with that. I stopped early on because it started to get a lot more romantic than I would like, and that I prefer in my books. Like, you've got the love triangle here in this story, and it's not handled as well as Saba Tahir does in Ember in the Ashes, but it's still here. So again, if you like romance and you like some of those tender caresses of the arm and of the cheek, and like, if that works for you, then you might also like this. But even if you don't like that, like me, and you like a blade in the dark and just really good, quick storytelling, this is a quick book, and it's the prose very easy, very complete story here, even with the Throne of Glass. It sets it up, of course, for future installments, but that can just be read as a standalone as well. This is an incredible story about a young assassin girl becoming, hopefully, the assassin of the king. We're going to trend even a little bit younger here, young adult, maybe moving into middle grade a little bit, with the Golden Compass. It is the first in the Dark Materials series by Philip Pullman, and man, this is one of those classics, or at least it's going to be. Shows, movies have been made from it to varying success. But the thing that stands out here is our main character, this young girl, Lyra, who she is as a character, what she has to go through, the pain she experiences, makes her a very real, relatable, lovable character. It's got such an interesting cast, and it's got daemons, or demons, however you pronounce it, D-A-E, smashed together, M-O-N-S. It's these little pre-Pokemon-like characters that are an animal representation, but they are connected somewhat, it's been a little while since I've read, to the soul, the spirit of an individual, and you don't touch someone else's daemon, but they can all be visible by all. There's a relationship there between our protagonist and hers, and then you've got her protector, which is this epic talking polar bear. What? It's a story also one of those that has like a lot more going on, maybe the debate, the conversation about science versus religion, but even if you don't want to get into all of that's somewhat behind the scenes, and you can enjoy it just as an enjoyable novel, or you can go deeper. And then I wanted to conclude with the GOAT, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, or the Philosopher's Stone, wherever you are from in the world. It's just, it belongs where it is. Now, I know that the author is getting a lot of flack lately and pushback, and the conversation is not to be had here. It doesn't negate how impactful Harry Potter was in so many of us as formational in our reading journey. It brought so many of us into the world of fantasy, and for good reason. The fully beautiful, realized world that is Hogwarts and all of its magical intricacies. This is a very stereotypical fantasy novel, middle grade novel, especially the first few. It gets darker and trends older as the series progresses, but this first book is a very quick, very easy, flawed and imperfect, but incredible read about young wizards set in a magical world that are learning spells at a magical school, and the friendships that are formed there, the enemies that are made there, and the magical reality behind it all. Harry Potter. You've heard of it, of course, and it is most certainly a recommended read. These are my suggestions if you're looking to get into the fantasy genre. If I missed any that you think are must-reads, please let me know in the comments down below. I'm always looking for more suggestions, and I surely might have missed some key ones in there. And as always, thank you so much for watching and liking this video. If you haven't yet, click subscribe and join the Dragon Army, and we'll see you in the next one.